Lieutenant Sarah Hayes looked like just another medic in uniform, blending into the sea of soldiers moving through the dusty forward operating base in Afghanistan. She carried her aid bag slung over her shoulder, boots worn from months in the desert, and eyes that held more fatigue than she ever admitted out loud. To anyone watching, she seemed ordinary, quiet, professional, one more Navy SEAL corpsman serving her team without drawing attention. No one outside her unit knew how many lives she had already saved, or the heavy scars she carried from battles that seemed to blur together. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. The night was still when the calm broke. Her SEAL team, moving through a rocky valley to clear an insurgent stronghold, was ambushed without warning. Explosions ripped through the silence. Bullets sparked against stone and shouting filled the air. The enemy had been waiting, perfectly positioned. The stakes were brutal. If the team didn't hold, the valley would become a death trap, and reinforcements would never reach them in time. Worse, a fallen comrade lay exposed in the open ground, bleeding fast. If Sarah couldn't reach him, he would die within minutes. Panic spread in the shadows. One younger SEAL shouted that they were outnumbered, that there was no way to get to the wounded. The team leader barked orders, but the pressure was crushing. Even Sarah felt it, the familiar voice of doubt whispering that she couldn't do this again. She remembered her last deployment, when she had lost a man despite doing everything she could. That failure haunted her, and now it threatened to paralyze her. But in the midst of chaos, Sarah forced herself to breathe. She looked at the bleeding operator in the distance, then at her teammates who were pinned down and desperate. With a steady voice, she spoke up, revealing what she rarely said aloud. "I've been here before. I can get to him." It wasn't arrogance. It was quiet, unshakable determination. She wasn't just a medic. She had trained with the best. She had fired next to warriors like Marcus Luttrell and studied battlefield tactics from men like Kyle. She knew what had to be done. The build-up was agonizing. Sarah adjusted her kit, checked the tourniquet clipped to her vest, and secured her rifle at her side. The valley seemed to hold its breath as she prepared to cross. Tracer rounds lit up the night sky, the rattle of machine guns echoing in every direction. She counted her movements, planned each breath, each dash from rock to rock, time stretched thin, every second louder than the one before. The only sound she heard clearly was her own heartbeat, pounding in rhythm with her resolve. Then she moved. Bursting from cover, she sprinted across the open ground, bullets kicking dust at her heels. She slid behind a slab of stone, then dashed again, until finally she reached the fallen SEAL. He was pale, barely conscious, blood soaking his uniform. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees, pulling her aid kit open with practiced precision. She applied pressure, wrapped a tourniquet, and inserted an airway tube, all while rounds cracked overhead. One enemy fighter spotted her and opened fire directly at her position. Sarah drew her sidearm, fired 3 controlled shots, and dropped. Him, her medic's hands proving she was a warrior too. Her patient stabilized. Sarah prepared for the hardest part, getting him back. She hoisted the full weight of the wounded SEAL across her shoulders, pain shooting through her side as a bullet grazed her ribs. She stumbled but didn't stop. Each step felt like a lifetime, the ground stretching endlessly. Behind her teammates provided covering fire, shouting her name, urging her forward. At last, she fell into cover with the team, the wounded man alive, because she refused to stop. For a moment, there was silence, just heavy breathing, the sound of dust settling. The men around her stared in disbelief. One younger SEAL, his hands shaking, finally asked, "Doc, were you even battle-trained for this?" His voice was a mixture of awe and confusion, as if he had just witnessed something impossible. Sarah, still catching her breath, looked at him with calm eyes and gave a small smile. "Someone had to," she said simply, before turning back to her patient. The reaction was overwhelming. Relief washed over the team, awe mixed with respect. Men who moments earlier doubted whether they would survive now looked at her as if she carried more than just medical skill. She carried the spirit that kept warriors alive. Their disbelief turned into gratitude, their fear into trust. Sarah didn't bask in it. She remained grounded, her hands steady as she continued working on the wounded seal, her voice calm as she directed the others to prepare an extraction. Her humility only deepened the respect in their eyes. For her, this wasn't about recognition. It was about duty. She trusted herself to step forward when no one else could. And in the closing silence of that battle, as helicopters finally thundered in to pull them out, the lesson was clear. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's carrying the weight of fear, doubt, and pain, and stepping forward anyway. Sarah Hayes proved that bravery isn't always loud or fearless. Sometimes it's a medic, wounded and exhausted, choosing to fight and heal at the same time. Her story reminded everyone that even when the odds seem impossible, belief in yourself can mean the difference between life and death. That night in the valley, Sarah was more than a medic. She was a warrior, a protector, and living proof that courage is not defined by titles but by the choices we make when everything is on the line. Petty Officer Claire Donovan looked like just another sailor in desert fatigues, blending in with the bustle of a forward operating base in Iraq. She carried herself quietly, eyes downcast, hands often busy with her medical kit or small notes. She scribbled to track supplies. To the untrained eye, she was simply another Navy SEAL medic, there to patch wounds and keep her team alive. Few would have guessed that behind those calm eyes lay a mind sharpened by countless hours of combat, training, and a will forged in fire. She didn't flaunt it. She didn't need to. She saved her strength for the moments that truly mattered. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind. And it's even crazier. The sun was beginning to sink when it happened. Her SEAL unit, led by a commander who once trained under Admiral William McRaven himself, had been sent on a covert mission. Secure an ancient desert ruin where insurgents were rumored to be hiding stockpiles of weapons. At first, the approach was quiet. Too quiet. Then, out of nowhere, the night erupted. Machine guns roared from hidden positions. Rockets screamed through the air. The sand exploded around them. The team had walked straight into a trap. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If they failed to hold, their position would be overrun, and dozens of insurgents armed with RPGs would pour out into the nearby village, slaughtering innocents. Worse, the SEALs' only communications antenna had been knocked out in the first blast. If they didn't fight back with everything they had, they would die alone in the desert. Fear spread like wildfire. One of the younger operators cursed, shouting, "We're pinned! We can't get out of this!" Another tried firing blindly into the night, his shots scattering wide. Even Claire's commander looked grim, calculating losses. Claire herself felt the familiar shadow of doubt creeping in, whispering of her last mission in Syria, the one where shrapnel had torn through her arm and nearly ended her career. She had lain in the dirt, helpless, convinced she wasn't cut out for combat. That memory gnawed at her now, threatening to pull her back into fear. But Claire forced herself to breathe, steady and calm. The battlefield needed more than panic. It needed someone to act. She looked around at her brothers in arms, their fear mirroring her own. And then, with quiet determination, she spoke. "I've trained for this. I can handle it." Her words weren't arrogant. They were a simple reminder, to herself and to the men around her, that she wasn't just a medic. She had studied warfighting alongside legends. She had pushed herself through the brutal gauntlet of SEAL combat training, and she had never forgotten the words of Medal of Honor recipient Michael Murphy. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the will to act in spite of it. The build-up to her move was tense beyond words. Claire checked her M4 rifle, feeling the cold weight of the weapon settle in her hands. She adjusted the sling of her medic bag, making sure the tourniquets and bandages were within reach. Around her, the desert seemed to hold its breath, broken only by the deafening rattle of enemy gunfire. Time stretched thin, each second dragging like an eternity. She counted silently, lips moving. 3, 2, 1. Then she broke cover. Bullets chewed into the sand around her as she sprinted across the open ruins, closing the distance to a wounded teammate who lay bleeding near a broken stone wall. She slid beside him, her hands already in motion. Tourniquet high on the thigh, gauze packed deep into the wound. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Her voice was calm, commanding. "Stay with me. You're not done yet." Suddenly, an enemy fighter appeared on the wall above, raising his rifle to finish them both. Claire reacted without hesitation. She dropped her medical kit, pulled her sidearm, and fired. One clean shot. The man toppled backward into the dust. Her patient stared at her, in shock, whispering hoarsely, "Doc, were you even trained for this kind of fight?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled her teammate onto her shoulder, ignoring the pain in her own body as shrapnel ripped into her leg. Every step back toward her unit felt like moving through fire. The desert air burned her lungs, the weight of her comrade dragging at her shoulders. But she refused to fall. With each stagger forward, she proved the answer to his question without words. Finally, she stumbled back behind cover with the others, dropping her patient gently onto the ground where 2 SEALs grabbed him. Silence fell for just a moment as the men stared at her. Relief flooded their eyes, mixed with awe. One SEAL whispered, "I thought we lost him. And you?" Another simply shook his head, disbelieving. Claire just gave a faint smile, brushing dust and blood from her face. "I trusted myself," she said softly, her voice carrying in the silence. It wasn't pride. It was the truth. The crowd's reaction was overwhelming. Men who moments earlier doubted survival now looked at her with something close to reverence. Their disbelief melted into respect. In her calm, steady presence, they found their courage again. Weapons steadied. Voices grew firm. The team pulled together, fighting with renewed fury. And when the call for air support finally went through, Claire's actions had bought them the precious minutes they needed. By the time the helicopters arrived, the SEALs were battered but alive, their position still held. They owed that to the medic who fought like a warrior, proving that courage didn't belong only to the men holding rifles, but to anyone willing to step into the fire. As the rotors thundered and the desert sands whipped into the night, Claire sat in the helicopter, exhaustion pressing down on her. Around her, the men stared with quiet gratitude, though none spoke. She didn't need words. She knew what they were thinking. The lesson from that night was one she carried for the rest of her life. Courage is not found in titles or expectations. It is not about being fearless. It is about standing tall when fear wants to break you, about answering the call when others hesitate. Petty Officer Claire Donovan had been asked if she was trained for battle. Her answer was not given in speeches or bravado. It was given in blood, grit, and the unshakable will to act. And from that day forward, every man who fought beside her knew, if Claire was there, hope was too. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter moved through the chaotic Syrian town like any other Navy SEAL medic, blending into the shadows of bombed-out buildings and narrow alleyways. Her uniform was dusty, sleeves rolled up, boots scuffed from months, in the heat, and her hands perpetually busy with supplies or checking radios. To a casual observer, she looked like just another member of the SEALs, focused, professional, and quiet. But behind her calm exterior was a warrior's heart, trained, in medicine and combat alike, and guided by a determination that refused to let anyone fall. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. The operation had begun smoothly. A rescue mission to extract hostages being held in the city outskirts. Emily's team moved cautiously, covering each street corner, checking each doorway. Suddenly, a hail of gunfire erupted from snipers perched on rooftops. The team's point man went down instantly, and chaos exploded around them. Civilians screamed and ran for cover. The stakes were brutally clear. If Emily and her SEAL team failed, innocent lives would be lost, and the mission would end in disaster. Fear gripped some of the team members. One man froze behind a barricade, shouting that the snipers were too skilled, and that they should fall back. Another cursed under his breath, struggling to aim through the chaos. Even Emily's commander hesitated for a split second, calculating risk and losses. Emily herself felt the familiar surge of doubt. She remembered a previous mission when an RPG blast had taken out half her team, leaving her racked with guilt over lives she hadn't been able to save. The memory tried to root her in fear, but she refused. Emily squared her shoulders. "I've trained for this. We can do it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. She had studied alongside men like John, Basilone, and Roy Benavides, learning that courage and precision could turn the tide in even the darkest situations. She wasn't just a medic, she was a fighter, trained to step into danger when others couldn't. The tension mounted. Every movement was measured. Emily adjusted her M9 pistol, checked the contents of her aid bag, and planned her route to reach the wounded point man. Smoke from burning vehicles clouded her vision. Dust swirled around her boots. The distant echoes of gunfire became a rhythmic drumbeat, each crack stretching seconds into eternities. She could feel the heartbeat in her chest echoing in her ears. Every decision mattered. A single misstep could mean death for her or her teammates. Then, she moved. Emily dashed from behind cover, low and swift, zigzagging across the street toward the fallen SEAL. A sniper shot slammed into the wall inches from her shoulder, sending shards of concrete flying. She didn't falter. She reached the point man, rolling him onto her back as she knelt, applying pressure to his gunshot wounds. Her fingers moved deftly, tying off tourniquets, checking pulses, and inserting airway tubes, all while bullets whistled past. Suddenly, another threat emerged. A man appeared from a shattered doorway, rifle raised. Emily reacted instantly, firing 2 precise shots, sending him tumbling into debris. Her patient groaned weakly, eyes wide with awe and pain. "Medic, are you really trained for this?" he whispered. Emily didn't need to answer. She hoisted him across her shoulders, grit searing through every muscle, and began the long trek back toward her team. Each step was agony. Her side throbbed from a graze that had barely missed her ribs, and every rock and rubble jarred her arms and legs. But she pressed on, refusing to falter. Behind her, her teammates laid covering fire, shouting encouragement, trusting her despite the impossible odds. Emily's training kicked in, every movement precise, every breath calculated. By the time she reached the cover of her team, sweat, dust, and blood coated her, but the point man was alive. For a moment, silence descended. The team stared at her in disbelief, awe shining in their eyes. One younger SEAL, his voice trembling, finally asked, "Chief, are you really battle-trained for this?" Emily looked at him calmly, brushing dirt from her uniform and adjusting her gear. "I trusted myself," she said, her voice steady. It was not a boast, it was the truth. Relief flooded the team. Where moments before they had feared death, they now saw hope and courage embodied in Emily's actions. Their disbelief turned into admiration, their panic into renewed determination. Inspired, They rallied together, pushing back against the insurgents with a precision and ferocity born of trust in each other. Emily continued her work, tending to the wounded while providing tactical guidance, demonstrating that a true warrior leads by example, whether with a scalpel or a weapon. As the helicopters approached to extract them, the city streets echoing. With gunfire, Emily remained composed. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her body, but her mind was clear. Around her, the team looked at her with quiet respect, knowing that without her courage and skill, many of them would not have survived. Emily didn't seek accolades or praise. She had done what needed to be done. Her focus was always on life, on mission, on responsibility. That day in the Syrian town, Emily Carter became more than a medic. She became a symbol of courage under fire, a living testament to the truth that bravery is not defined by rank, gender, or role. It is defined by action when all seems lost. She taught her teammates, and anyone who would hear of her story, that courage often requires stepping into the fire, holding the line, and trusting in your own strength even when the world seems to crumble around you. And as the helicopter lifted, off carrying the wounded to safety, Emily looked down at the city below. The ruins, the smoke, the chaos, they all bore witness to one undeniable truth. Heroes are not always the loudest or the strongest, but those willing to act, to save lives, and to face impossible odds with unwavering determination. Emily Carter had answered the unasked question. Yes, she was trained for battle, not just in skill, but in heart, mind, and spirit. And in doing so, she left a mark on everyone she had fought alongside. Courage is not inherited. It is chosen, one fearless step at a time.